Welcome to the Legal Growth Table. I'm Andrew Hutchinson.
And I am Barbara Koenen-Geerdink.
And together, we are your hosts. Every 2 weeks, we sit down with the people who are actually doing the work of growing law firms from the inside. The ones who know where the real conversations happen, and more importantly, where they don't.
Because everyone in this industry talks about growth. Very few talk honestly about how it actually happens. The politics, the resistance, the things that didn't go to plan. That's what this table is for. So let's get into it.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Legal Growth Table. My name is Andrew Hutchinson and I am delighted to be joined by my co-host Barbara. And today we're going to introduce you to who we are, give you a bit of background on us as individuals and why we decided to set up this podcast. So I'm going to go first, mainly because Barbara made me, and I'm sure you'll see a lot of that as we go through these discussions over the coming months. So my name's Andrew Hutchinson. I am currently working for a variety of companies, but my background is I have been in legal technology for 21 years, and I've spent the last 10 years very specifically focused on marketing and BD professionals. So helping law firms use technology and data ultimately to drive better revenue growth. And as part of that, helping professionals in marketing and BD get out of the weeds of the day-to-day and into some of the more strategic things. I've been fortunate to meet Barbara on this journey. And Barbara, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone for tuning into our podcast and actually the very first episodes that we are launching today. My name is Barbara Koenen-Geerdink. I am originally from the Netherlands, but I am residing in Dubai for the last 11 years. I've been in the legal industry for about 16 years, and I've worked across a variety of firms, both in the Netherlands as well as in the Middle East, both international firms as well as regional firms. Lastly, with the largest regional law firm in the Middle East as their CMO. And then after that, I've gone on a bit of a journey, an entrepreneurial journey where I have supported a legal tech company, but also set up my own business. And a lot of what we're talking to in this podcast series actually is very much obviously growth related, but comes also from my experience having been in seat as a former CMO, but also having built a business as well. So we'd like to speak with a number of people in our podcast, guests that we will invite that have a unique view on what growth actually means for law firms in particular. And we want to make sure that we empower people around us. So it's not necessarily only business development and marketing professionals, but it could be innovation officers or CEOs of law firms, managing partners, associates, anyone really working across the ecosystem. And we're hugely excited that we are talking about something that people very often just hold very close to their chest because you don't want to put all the cards out on the table all at once. We're not sharing trade secrets. We're only sharing valuable insights that people would just really like to talk about.
That's absolutely right. And I think, Barbara, you talked to some of the reasons why we wanted to do this. I think, and you and I talk about this a lot, we see this massively changing market in front of us, driven by a number of different things. And, you know, you and I talk to people all the time about, you know, what is the impact of AI going to be on how we deliver legal services, and what does that mean for how we go and generate revenue, and then ultimately what does that mean for marketing and BD professionals? And I think you know, we both see this opportunity for marketing and BD professionals to take a step up, driven by a couple of factors: the changing technology environment that allows a lot of that grunt work that historically marketing and BD professionals have done, to take that away and allow them to spend more of their time on the strategic elements of what is marketing and BD when you think about actually driving revenue. And I think that's a really exciting moment. But I think one of the things that we observe is that how you get there can be really challenging inside a law firm as a marketing and BD professional, We know that as a profession, it hasn't necessarily been highly regarded by the partners themselves. And so there is a step up. And I think what's exciting for me is this opportunity to share some of the things that people are doing to make that intentional step and to reach for the thing that's now available to them that the partners maybe aren't going to give them, but it's there if you go and do the right things.
Yeah, it's super exciting actually. If you think about even the last couple of years, say maybe 1 or 2 years, right? Everything that has happened within that time, like obviously AI coming in at rapid speed. I think there's a lot of. It's not like there is adoption. I think there's great adoption, but people have still only scratched the surface of what it can actually do. And I'm speaking about sort of like across the legal work, but also what we see across the business of law in terms of, the operational side of law firms. And it couldn't be a more exciting time, I think, for all of us working in this industry. The challenge, however, what I've seen and you've seen, having been involved in work with law firms and having worked in law firms, is it's still such a traditional operating model and is a slow-moving beast at a time where technology changes so incredibly rapidly. And that is an opportunity, but at the same time, a challenge in its own right. Because how do we keep up and how do we change that narrative for law firms that they would rather embrace the innovation around it rather than think, okay, no, we don't have to jump on the bandwagon. We can wait our time and, time will tell and things will come as they come. But I know that you and I think about these things very, very differently. And we feel like, no, now is the future. You're already late to come to this party. And I'm not just speaking about AI, but generally like the ways that firms can grow. And we've worked with so many firms, Andrew, and how often have we talked about simple things like grow through using and understanding your data. I mean, you've seen it. It's a mess. So even the very simple things, we don't really get it right, at least generally speaking.
Well, and I think that's an interesting point. If you look at the way that law firms have run for many years, yes, it's a collection of people that sit under a brand, but ultimately the equity partners exist in a world where they can do what they want to do. And you talk about data, one of the biggest challenges that we've seen for decades in law firms is that the data isn't good. Well, why isn't it good? Because a partner sits and says, well, I'm going to create a client record in the finance system, and I'm not going to bother to go and look and see if there are other records for this existing client. And so we have this history of data that is just really bad because of the sort of cultural makeup of a law firm.
Data pollution, I think.
Data what?
Data pollution. I think that's what we're going to call it. Yeah, but people don't think about the consequences of that, right? So those habits are essentially now detrimental because we start to wake up to the fact that AI can only function as well as the data that it has access to. And if you have heaps of unstructured data, i.e. most law firms, then you very soon come to know, okay, the AI is actually useless.
Well, and I think in fairness to law firms, they haven't needed to use the data in a way that corporations have. If you think about, excuse me, your traditional corporation, they've been using data for decades to figure out where do their clients come from, how do they attract more of the right people, how do they drive operational efficiency across the things that they're doing. And law firms, for the most part, and it's different region to region, like if you look at the UK, in the 2000s, right, the legal market was in a position of change. Things were commoditizing hard, and firms were trying to figure out how do we continue to make money. The US, a totally different kettle of fish. I mean, the US just continues to make more and more money. And the largest American firm is generating $7 billion, I think, at this point. And so they just continue to make money. And so they haven't really seen the need to analyze the data and say, what is the data telling us and what should we do with that? And it's funny, even today, with all of the kerfuffle around Claude and what does that mean for how legal work gets delivered and all of those sorts of things, they still make more money. They made more money last year than they did in 2024, even with all of this uncertainty. And 2026 is set to be another bumper year for them. And it's interesting, right? Because we talk about the power of data and using data and making better decisions. But for some firms, it's like, well, why?
It's already good enough. I know, yeah. And this is really interesting. And this is one of the reasons, obviously, why we started this podcast, because I think we are also very curious to tap into this concept of, there is not necessarily across probably the majority of firms a real urgency to do things more efficient or better because revenue is already coming in. Is there really a risk of it's declining? I think not yet. But I am very keen to hear views also from the guests that we bring in and have a seat at our table to see what they think about what the future is going to hold for us. I mean, I appreciate nobody has a crystal ball, at least I don't, to see into the future. But I do think, having spoken with a lot of general counsel, especially lately, on service delivery and their expectations and pricing, etc., there's friction already. And I think the friction is only just going to increase. So I think there is no doubt things need to change, models need to change. It's only a matter of time when the resistance and the friction is becoming sort of like so big that law firms are they are with their back against the wall, essentially, and they'll have no other way than make a decision on that. I think you can be ahead of that time. But it requires obviously a different way of thinking, a different mindset, and all of this good stuff we're going to tap into in the podcast to really decipher what do experts on growth that have been through sort of like innovative changes within their firms, what do they predict is actually going to happen and how is that going to take shape?
It's interesting that, the way that you just described that. And I think oftentimes we think in law about catastrophic change, not catastrophic, maybe that's a bit extreme, but in the way that you see in other industries, right? You look at something like the accounting industry, which has changed massively over the last decade or 2 decades because of technology, because you can crunch numbers systematically, way more efficiently, and you can start to analyze those numbers again more efficiently because of the structure that you have around accounting and those sorts of things. And I think sometimes we think about legal in that vein, that it's going to change in the way that other industries have changed. You think about something more in our personal lives, like grocery, right? Grocery, you used to go to the grocery store every day, every weekend or whatever it was, and you would do your shopping. Well, now you can arrange to have it delivered to you. You can arrange to pick it up. Very significant change in that industry. But what's interesting is, I think, as we talk to people, and I think we'll draw this out in some of the interviews that we do or the discussions that we have, there's a nuance to that, which is, yes, firms are continuing to be successful, but there's a change under the surface. And so one of the conversations that you and I had this week was around, what is the changing structure of pitching inside law firms? How is that changing? Yes, there's still a relationship element to it, but is there more structure? Is there more detail? Is there more competition that's being driven out in that process than there was historically? And that opens the door to start asking questions around, do we have the right people at the table in this process? And I know that you have been doing some really interesting stuff around personality testing of partners. And what does that mean? And do you have the right personality to be at the table? Do we need to put different people around you? And I think that's the thing that's going to develop, which is really interesting, that openness of partners and law firms to say, who are we? Are we the right people to be doing these different elements of running a law firm?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think, as we will be speaking with different guests who have their own views and opinions on the matter, I'm also quite keen to hear, it seems that law firms are still hungry for growth because you see the merger and acquisition notifications pop up like very regularly lately. So there must still be, despite the firms making, great revenues, there must still be a need. Maybe not necessarily a need or a desire to do things differently. I would like to think that it's not just only money or revenue driven. I would like to think there's different reasons for doing so. And I would like to think that this is driven by an outside in approach, i.e., you follow your clients wherever they go and whatever they require and need to basically develop your service offering around that. That's what I would like to think. But I think in this podcast, we're going to figure out what is the real driver behind growth. And growth, as we said, can take different shapes and forms. And that's what makes it really interesting. I don't think there is a one size fits all principle. I think we're going to touch on many different concepts around growth and how firms can realize that. Some may be rather traditional, others might be a little bit more innovative, but I'm very excited to hear more from our guests that we're going to bring on. And obviously, Andrew, I know we can never stop talking about this topic, so you and I will also share some snippets of the stuff that we discuss and that we speak about with people that we meet within the industry.
Yes, I think, and I think we have, I mean, we're starting to piece together who some of those early people are. And I think even in the conversations that you and I have had so far, there's some really interesting conversations that are going to come out. The different challenges that people are facing. I think it's really interesting. One of the things that we've seen in our industry is people coming from outside in. And bringing that different perspective, whether that be from a consulting company, whether that be from having been in a tech startup, and bringing some of those principles into our ecosystem, I think is fascinating. But I think what's been interesting for you and I is it's still hard, even though you come from this very different perspective and highly successful. Turning the ship, getting the partners to think in a different way. I mean, that's ultimately the biggest challenge of all of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Is how do we get the partners to buy into this? And I know from your own perspective, like you've been through that, you've been on that journey many times. And I think it would be interesting, not just to hear how what the things that people are doing, but there's that cultural piece. What are the things that people are doing to get the partners on side? And I think that's going to be some of the secret sauce that we will draw out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also has to do with structure. And you touched a bit on culture earlier, but those principles, I think, go hand in hand, right? One can't do without the other. And I believe the whole sort of like growth narrative also depends on how willing firms are to change a bit of that structure. Because as you say, if you come in, bring different perspectives from another industry, for example, take FMCG. I mean, it's brilliant what we could learn from that industry alone. So much data that is being used to the advantage to grow at rapid speed as well. But we're not necessarily very open to it because we usually work with rather conservative, traditional partnerships. And then there is so many captains on one ship trying to steer the ship in a direction, likely also a different direction, which poses another challenge. And then we need to get our ideas across and show this is actually valuable. This could be a really good strategy for growth. They'll probably sit on it for a couple of years to then find out, oh, there might actually be something in this. Maybe we need to try this out and see how this is going to work out for us. I think at the beginning, I mean, we talk about this all the time. The commerciality is not necessarily there. Not every partner in a law firm started their career thinking, now I'm going to be an entrepreneur within a law firm. And essentially that's who they are. So all of those decisions around growth, decision making, is essential to understand the business of law as an actual business. And yeah, I think we will have lots of valuable insights that can up-level some of that thinking around it. And I hope that we can turn some minds, some partner minds perhaps, on what growth could also look like rather than, but it's worked for us over the past years. So let's just continue to do it in the way that we have and not change a thing. But I think those days are gone.
Well, I think we all hope so, right? And I think we see a glimmer of that, and it's really interesting this week. There's been a lot of posts about how does private equity invest in law firms when they can't be owners of law firms in certain jurisdictions, and the UK, as an example, and Australia have been in a position through changes in legislation for that to be a thing. And I was reading an article recently, somebody was talking about this on LinkedIn, and I went back and found an article about a law firm called Paribas that was one of the first firms in the UK to get investment from private equity. And ultimately it fell apart and they went back to being a traditional law firm. And so, but again, this conversation has started to redevelop. Like, how are private equity companies going to come in? They see an opportunity for change, again, fueled by all of this wonderful AI that's happening. Yes. And we're going to have lawyer robots and all of this fantastic stuff. But as that happens, as we know, that does bring a change. And I think it's really interesting looking at some of the firms in the UK now that run like true businesses. Lawyers are just consultants. They don't have to go generate revenue. There's a whole infrastructure around them to go find the work, to help them manage and nurture their relationships and their clients and all those things. And so I think we can take some of those learnings, and I think that's going to be an interesting thing for this podcast, is looking at some of those different organizations, some that are being invested in, some that have already gone through that transition. What does that do for the broader market? And how can we start to share some of that change? Because you're right, it is coming, and it might not be that we're going to see massive declines in revenue from law firms, but the operational structures of how law firms work, I think that's where we will definitely start to see some change.
We're going to bring it all to the mix. I'm really excited. Thank you for tuning into our very first podcast episode. The following episodes are going to be around 30 minutes, so I hope you'll have 30 minutes spare every now and again to hopefully feel inspired, motivated, and yeah, I think we are all for innovation, but in the right way, and make sure that we can help law firms to grow in the directions that works for them. If this conversation resonated with you, share it with someone in your firm who needs to hear it.
You can find us on Spotify and YouTube, and follow along on LinkedIn, where we keep the conversation going between episodes.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.